Welcome back to Lost for Words with Lori. It is Friday. Thank God it's Friday. It is the 9th of September. So thank you. I hope you're all having a great week. I hope you're ready for a great weekend. I know I am. I took an extra day off so that I can have 2 days in a row and enjoy some quality time with my brother from another who is visiting from out of state. And I have to say, I've really enjoyed having somebody here. It's been really cool to have company. We've had friends visit, we've had great conversations. It's been really cool. So thank you. I appreciate you coming and listening to my drivel once again. If you haven't and you're new here, please feel free to share, to like, comment if you wish. I'm not going to ask people to subscribe to my channel unless you find it something that you're interested in, but I appreciate all of the love, the support, and all of the people around me who just support my grief journey and my life and my quest, I suppose, for trying to be a better version of myself every day. Yeah, life's hard, man. I wanted to talk a little bit today about trauma bonding. It's interesting when you are working on your own grief journey and you start looking back a little bit on patterns and things that basically shape and create who you are as a person. And I mean, I'm a child of trauma. I'm no stranger to therapy. I've been to a lot of therapy my whole life, being a victim of child abuse and my parents divorcing very early. My mom had decided that therapy would be great to keep her family together and to learn and grow and heal from the things that we experienced that we had no control over. And so I've been in therapy most of my life. Started with, just going to family counseling and then eventually moving on to having a personal therapist who would help me navigate life and all the stages of that, starting as a young child and all through the teenage years and, all the challenges that come with being a teenager, right? Rebelling and drugs and drinking and all of the things, depression and just the things that post-traumatic stress, really, that was undiagnosed when you're younger, and you learn about those things decades later when you're working through new things, new challenges. And part of that was just recognizing patterns starting from my childhood and all of the things that I've had to endure and go through up to this point. And recognizing the patterns of my own behavior, of how I've managed to self-sabotage my relationships with people or my own life because I was living in a constant state of coping mechanisms based on, just trying to survive. And, I think one of the things that I've recognized, especially with the new circles of friends that I've created over time, and especially being on this journey, is that we all have a tendency to carry our baggage, our backpacks, our suitcases of trauma with us. And a lot of people are uncomfortable unpacking those and replacing them with new articles of clothing. I use that as an analogy. And as we start digging through the old stuff in our suitcases, so to speak, and replacing them with new clothes, it's uncomfortable. It's always uncomfortable to put on that new outfit and not be critical that you're more comfortable in the old stuff. And me being able to recognize that, and that, part of my grief therapy or my grief counseling, and my journey and trying to be a better version of me is accepting the fact that, I didn't want to jump into a new relationship because of trauma bonding. And it's a real thing. It's real with your friends. It's real with wanting to have a relationship or be involved with someone because, you're afraid to be alone. And being afraid to be alone isn't necessarily a bad thing. For me, personally, it's always been if the fear of being alone is greater than the fear of being healthy. And I had to make a decision that right now I'm in the best place I could possibly be to make decisions that are just good for me. And that, yeah, I can admit that I'm afraid and terrified to be alone because I don't know what that's like. I've never been alone. I went from, growing up with your family to a relationship to another relationship to getting married to having kids, to a divorce, obviously, and then into another long-term relationship that started out wonderfully. At least in the beginning, you have good experiences. You learn to communicate. You find people that you can cohabitate with and you want to spend time with, and that you make those decisions together. And I think, I recognized the communication breakdown in my marriage, my last marriage, I should say, which, when you start to, I don't know, kind of go back and look, my marriage was a wonderful thing. And being with my husband was awesome up to a certain point. And realizing that people do change, they grow, they evolve, and people grow apart. But if you can communicate that and learn to grow together, it becomes, a journey that you take on together. And I recognized the communication breakdown in my marriage early, but instead of accepting and facing it and saying, how can we fix this, I just kind of shut down. And recognizing that that was my pattern of coping mechanism, and kind of walking away from solutions and healthy conflict resolution, I just kind of went in the other direction. And eventually those communication breakdowns end up, damaging relationships to the point where, in my case, I checked out emotionally long before they did. They were content and complacent with the way things were, and I became resentful and angry and had all of these emotions that caused me to just basically wash my hands of it. And it's difficult, to go back and say, what if? And I made bad choices. I cut ties and run. And when I got into therapy after that, recognizing that, the pattern of how I responded to that and how, I used that run, fight or flight kind of coping mechanism my whole life, to run away from my problems. And it was a way of, shutting down. It was a way of protecting myself. It was a way of not being accountable for my own part in things, and being afraid of change, afraid of accepting that I'm not perfect or human, and that, I didn't want to be the bad guy. And I think with my marriage, I was willing to accept that there were going to be people, especially my ex-husband, who felt that I was the bad guy. I made some bad decisions, and I had to live with that. And I decided that if there's always going to be somebody in your life, whether it's a friend, a foe, a relationship, your parents, your family, who are going to think that you're the only one who made the mistake. You're the bad guy. And that's okay. I can accept that about the way things happened. Still makes me accountable for my behavior. Gratefully, I've been able to communicate that with my ex-husband, and we've been able to talk about where we went wrong, and be friends, be able to discuss the things that we need to heal on our new paths and our new lives, alone, without each other, and accept that, yeah, we had, 15 good years together. However, I made some mistakes, he made some mistakes, and it is what it is. You can't go backwards. And when you talk about trauma bonding, I was in a really tough spot in my life where I was ready to just stop what I was doing and run away and cut ties. And I did, and that's when I met Toby. And, we talk about trauma bonding. I mean, he was in a situation where he had lost his wife to cancer and he was alone and he hated being alone. And I was in a relationship and in a marriage where I felt alone because we didn't do anything together and we had no communication and we had no marriage really. And we met and connected for various reasons why you connect with people. And it was an easy out for me. It was an easy way to say, I like this person and we can help each other and we can start a new life together. And thinking that that was acceptable. And is that always the case? Not always, but I did what I needed to do in my life. And I did. I started over. I moved to a whole nother state. I started a new life with a new person. But recognizing that the problems don't go away just because you start over and redefine yourself is mature. It's something that has to happen to have healthy change. And, Toby and I were wonderful in the beginning. You always have that honeymoon period with any relationship, and you don't recognize any red flags at the beginning until you settle in and start getting comfortable, and then try to establish your new life with boundaries, with expectations. And I recognized red flags in my relationship with Toby very early, that some of the behaviors that he was displaying, which were very toxic as far as trying to isolate me from friendships I've had for 20 years and being jealous and very untrusting about me having friends or me having social life or me being recognized or, given attention from other people. And it started causing problems in our relationship. And once I recognized those behaviors and started calling them out, we fought. Boy, did we fight. Whew. And those were some pretty tough days. The days when you're circling around in your existence wondering why you got here in the first place and how did I jump from one frying pan into a new fire. The greatest thing about Toby and I was being able to recognize those red flags and say, we need to do this. And our this was, you need to go talk to somebody and recognize what your own trauma is and what you haven't healed from. And, because I think in his mind, he wasn't doing anything wrong. He was still in that mode of survival. He was still doing the same things that made him comfortable because he didn't know any better. And so when he started his journey with therapy, he said, well, I'll go, but, we have to go to, couples counseling together. And I said, fine, I'm good with that. Let's do that. And when the time came to do that and we started going together, me being able to recognize the certain behaviors that I was doing to cope with how I was feeling and how I was feeling attacked and traumatized again. And being able to open up that line of communication and understand that being transparent with my partner and not making assumptions and thinking that he can read my mind, and also not scorekeeping him and saying, well, just because I'd been through a bad marriage or he had been through lots of bad relationships after he lost his wife, that we can't recognize that we still react the same ways to protect ourselves. And they're just not healthy. And so once we learn to open our mouths and be transparent to a fault, and it's scary because you're so vulnerable to open yourself up that way. But we recognized our own bad behaviors. And then it was time for me to find my own therapy. And it seems a little overkill, right? My fiance is in therapy, I'm in therapy, and we're in therapy together. But recognizing the healthy changes and what I needed to learn from that was the deal breaker, and it changed everything. It was the ability for me to say, I've got all of this bad old clothing in my luggage, and so does he. And we started taking them out and shaking them out and going, recognizing this was just a pattern of self-sabotage, of bad behavior. It was a coping mechanism that no longer served us. And as soon as we were able to learn and not judge each other based on all of our past traumas, and recognize that, Toby wasn't my ex-husband and I wasn't his ex, girlfriends, that made him feel like he was never enough, we were able to learn to grow together. And I think I recognized our different stages of growth and the pattern of development. Toby was suffering in his own head about never being enough and all of those bad things that he was told his whole life, and the trauma of never being enough, never living up to expectations, had shattered his self-esteem to the point where he couldn't trust anyone, including me. And my own difficulty in running away from things when they didn't suit me, instead of turning around, looking at them, and learning new mechanisms, we were both self-sabotaging our own relationships based on enabling codependent toxic behavior. And breaking that down is tough, and it's scary, and it's vulnerable, and nobody likes to be that way. But at the end of the day, communication was the key. And both of us being able to set healthy boundaries with each other and understand different ways to communicate what we were feeling, and owning our own accountability and not projecting those emotions onto our partner. It's a lot like holding up a mirror and saying, this is what I see, but you need to look at your part in this, and I will help you. I think the hardest thing, and the I don't know, the light bulb that goes off was being able to say to Toby is, I can't fix your problems, but I can hold your hand while you work on them, and not judge his experience and his baby steps on the fact that I had already gone through all of that and healed from my childhood trauma to a certain extent. But also worked on dealing with my own stuff, so that we could come together with our own couples counseling and realize how to communicate with each other without triggering each other's trauma responses, and learn new habits and patterns. Toby was afraid of being shut out and being ignored and the silent treatment, and that killed him. But when I was upset and angry, I wanted a 24-hour cool down period. And so that was a constant point of contention when we would disagree or argue, and we would be emotional, and he wanted to solve it right away, and I wanted time to think. And we clashed all the time in that behavior. But when we went to therapy together, we realized we were able to compromise and try to, devolve that emotion so that we could step back and look at the situation objectively, and set those healthy boundaries, and be like, I'm angry right now, but it doesn't mean that I don't love you. And that's a hard thing to get to. It takes a lot of shadow work. It takes a lot of maturity to accept that I do things this way and my partner does things this way. And that we did, both of us, bond over past traumas and that need to want to be with somebody. And it's okay. It was okay to fall in love and have that connection, but then realize that relationships, and that includes friendships, doesn't necessarily mean romantic ones, but they take a lot of work and they take a lot of compromise. And it takes a lot of maturity to be able to accept that I'm not always going to say the right thing, and that when I'm hurt and angry, I'm going to throw stones at the person that I love more than anything, and I'm going to do it to get that reaction because they hurt me first. And to be able to unlearn those kind of bad behaviors that we use to survive and to cope. And it's tough. It's very hard. And I think the hardest part right now is it's coming up on a year of me being alone, and missing that companionship, missing that love, missing that relationship, and that fear that everyone has, that I don't want to be alone. But I'm learning now that it's okay to be alone, and that when I'm feeling lonely, I have to learn better patterns of behavior to reach out to the people that can listen and understand, but not try to fall into that trap of self-sabotaging myself with bonding with another imperfect, broken human. And not for lack of wanting companionship or, intimacy or any of those things, but recognizing that this isn't the time for that in my life. And that unlearning, 50 years of behavior is going to take a long time, and not to push that, and not give myself a timeline of how long it's going to take for me to heal. It's an ongoing process. And even if I were to fall in love or find a relationship or somebody that I connect with, recognizing or being hyper aware of whether it's being afraid to be alone or if it's genuine. And it's difficult to not second guess that. And that's true with not only your relationships, but also with your friends. I've made some really great friends through this experience of trauma that I've experienced by Toby's death. His friends, the people who were around me when he died, and how we've all tried to learn from that and understand how that's affected us and be there to support each other. And it's easy for a lot of people who go through that kind of loss to want to just reach out and replace that. But doing it in the right way became very important to me. I didn't want to sabotage a new relationship by carrying my old luggage and my grief into something new, knowing that I'm too vulnerable and it's too easy to not change patterns, and that my fear of being alone would probably create negative reactions to anybody new. And also a lot of the shadow work that I do on myself and the therapy that I do about myself, it's hard when the people around you see you growing and changing and are happy about it, but also they believe that, because of that, my expectations are higher. I have stronger boundaries about what I will tolerate in my friendships and in my relationships, and about how I will allow myself to be treated. And the naysayers or the poo-pooers or the people around you will be like, well, your standards are too high. You're never going to find anybody to meet that. And being able to accept that if that means that I need to be alone and not in a serious relationship with anybody on a romantic level, then I'm going to have to accept that. And a lot of people aren't willing to do that. But it gives me the opportunity and the excitement to start really working on me and maintaining good new friendships with people, because I like people, and maybe helping us all learn and grow together has been a wonderful journey for me. Not without its own pain, not without its own confrontations, you're not without conflict. Even being with some of my new closest friends that I've bonded with over the trauma of losing Toby, there's been conflict. And part of being on that journey to be a better version of myself is learning how to handle those conflicts, and resolve them in ways that serve me and that are healthy for me, that don't enable me to caretake and self sabotage and fall back into patterns of I'll just give in, or just compromise, or be complacent about what's best for me. And that's hard. It's hard when you are empathic. It's hard when you care about other people. It's hard when you want to be a people pleaser because you want people to like you. But at the end of the day, the hardest lesson I've had to learn, and one that I encourage other people to learn, is that I have to learn to love myself first. And that means accepting all of the things that I don't like about myself and literally unpacking them from my baggage and shaking them out and taking a hard look at those things and saying, it's time to deal, cope, and let go, and learn new behaviors about loving who I am, every broken piece of me, and accepting that I can't go back and change things I have no control over. And try to set healthy boundaries with myself, and hold myself accountable. And I think that's why transparency is so important to me, and wearing my emotions on my sleeve and being as upfront and honest about what's good for me, and saying no when I don't feel right about something. I'm trusting my gut. I'm trusting my intuition now, and standing up for myself and saying, you know what? You know that I'm honest, and I'm going to give it to you like it is. And that doesn't come without accountability. It doesn't give me the right to be an asshole or treat people terribly. But it just means that I've become stronger, and I'm hoping that other people around me can also learn to be stronger within themselves. And even though I've bonded with new friends over the trauma that we've experienced together, that if we communicate openly and we recognize the red flags and we establish healthy boundaries with each other, we can all learn and grow from the experience we shared together. And it doesn't have to be negative. It doesn't have to be toxic or codependent. And it can start making you heal in ways that you never thought possible. And you can start looking forward to new things, happiness, joy, whatever that looks like in your world. And also have people who are willing, to help hold your hand while you work on the things that they can't fix, and vice versa. And for that, I'm very grateful. I'm grateful for the ability to vent out what I think here on this platform, for the ability to have hope and faith that I can get through the things that have held me back for so long, and that I can establish wonderful new friendships, and maybe someday a relationship that's healthy, that respects my boundaries, and that makes me feel good about who I am. And that's how I feel about that. That's, to me, trauma bonding is sometimes, and 90% of the time, I've recognized that most people jump into those relationships and they're toxic, and they end up very terribly and tough. But you can come through these things when you're willing to step back and look in the mirror and recognize your own patterns, your own take out those bad pieces of clothing from the luggage, and recognize that it's not your fault, that you were traumatized when you were growing up. But it's also not fair for me to expect anybody new in my life, friends, relationships, anyone else, to put on those clothes. It's not them. They don't have to own that. I do. And I can't hold them accountable for the behavior of people in my past who treated me poorly. It's not their fault. And all I can do is recognize that new relationships are hard, new friendships are hard, and as long as we can all communicate openly and respect each other's boundaries, and understand the patterns of the things that have held us back for so long, we all have an opportunity to grow and learn and evolve into the best versions of ourselves. But I know this was a little longer than mine are normally, but if you sat through it, I appreciate you. Thank you for listening. As always, you guys know the drill. Wash your fucking hands and try to be a better human. I'll see y'all soon. I love you. Have a great weekend.